Welcome back. All right, power rankings for another week. One change with this week's power rankings. I'm not talking about the record over their last 10 games. Caused way too many arguments, and I thought, yeah, no, we'll just go back to just doing the standard power rankings and going from that. So again, it's 1 through 32. We all know the drill. Number 32 this week. Same as last week. Anaheim. Now, I was debating about whether or not Anaheim should be last, and then when I did that Anaheim video today, I was like, yeah, they've lost 13 out of 14. They kind of have to be last. Even if there's other teams that are playing poorly right now, I can't bump Anaheim up past them because they just keep losing. So for Anaheim, there's been some good games. There's been some strong ones here and there, but as I mentioned in the video earlier today, it's been a really rough go since they were 9-6 through their first 15 games. Number 31, same spot as last week as well. Chicago. So for the Chicago Blackhawks, we're just running through a season now where maybe they end up with Macklin Celebrini at the end of it. It'll be interesting to see if Chicago or Anaheim end up getting that player, because obviously with Bedard on one team, with Carlson on the other, these are teams that are putting together some pretty impressive blue chip pieces towards, when they're going to get better. But yeah, for Chicago, it already looks like this season's pretty much done, which on some level is fine. I think it's easier to get through a season where your team's nowhere near the playoffs than when they just barely miss, or they fall out at the last couple of weeks of the season. Number 30, dropping 2 spots from last week. Columbus. The Columbus Blue Jackets dropped down to 30th. They have 10 wins so far this year. They had the loss tonight against New Jersey, and the Columbus announcers tried their best to hype up that maybe they were going to come back, but I never really got a feeling that they were going to threaten New Jersey. Devils have started rolling, and Columbus is rolling in the other direction. So they're 30th on this week's power rankings, dropping 2 spots from last week. Number 29. And same spot as last week. So that feels like a victory, doesn't it? San Jose has stayed out of last spot for 3 weeks in a row now. So not too shabby. San Jose's played well enough to stay in that spot on the board. They did have the shutout loss last night against the Arizona Coyotes, but again, for the Sharks, this season is really more about trying to improve your overall play, and I think for these players, some of them, I would imagine, would be okay with being traded to a playoff team at the deadline, so the better you play between now and the deadline, the more of a chance there is that a contending team's going to come calling. So, San Jose, 29th on the board this week. Number 28, moving up 2 spots from last week, Seattle. So Seattle just moves up the 2 spots in part because their record has been so rough that a couple of wins, I mean, they help, sure, but they end up at 28th this week. They did have the shootout loss tonight against LA, which I give them full credit for that. I do. I think, you know what, they came back, they tied that one late, they managed to get a point out of it, and they could have won that shootout just every time LA needed a goal. They got it. So yeah, Seattle moves up to 28th. We'll see in the coming weeks what happens, because it does still feel like there's a spot open in the West, that there could very well be a playoff spot in the West that goes to a team that we might view as mediocre right now, but by the end of the season, who knows? All right, number 27, and same spot as last week. It's inconsistency. It's inconsistency from Buffalo. Buffalo is still sitting below NHL 500. So again, for people who ask about NHL 500, I'll explain it here. You have your regulation wins, well, your wins, all wins, including shootout and whatever, and then you have regulation losses. If you have 13 wins and 13 regulation losses, you're 500. Does not matter about the third column. And I've had people say, well, that's not right, and that shouldn't be, but it is. All 500 means is your points percentage is 500. It doesn't mean you've won half your games. It just means your points percentage is 500. So for Buffalo, it's still going to be a pretty tough climb for them. They need to get on a run. I think that needs to be on a T-shirt. Dear Buffalo, you need to get on a run. But yeah, 27th this week on the board yet again. Number 26, dropping 7 spots from last week. And yeah, it was a rough week for Ottawa. The Ottawa Senators. I did a video on them today as well, and it's been quite the drop for them. This is the month where they were supposed to make up space on themselves, towards playoffs, and it's just not been happening. They still have games in hand, but you have to win them, and that's always the key, right? So when people say, well, this team's played less games than that one, so they're going to end up ahead of the team that's ahead of them that's played more games. Not necessarily. I've seen that often enough that I've stopped talking about games in hand when I discuss things with standings. Or I don't really care, because there's too many times where I've said, well, this team's going to make it. They have all these games in hand, and then they don't. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I'll just stop assuming that teams are going to win those games in hand. Number 25, and same spot as last week. And it's consistency with Calgary as well. So Calgary gets the win tonight against Tampa Bay, and they're in the running for a playoff spot, sure. They've played more games than some of the other teams that are challenging for that playoff spot. And we'll see. If they can string some wins together, then we can have a discussion about Calgary, and yep, they look like they could be a playoff team. The sad part is when they wear those Blasty jerseys, I feel like their record's really bad when they wear the Blasty jerseys. I've gotten to the point where when they wear those black jerseys, I'm like, so I think they're going to lose because they're wearing the Blasties, which is too bad because I really like that whole look. I think it's fantastic, but yeah, their record has been very up and down. They get the up tonight. We'll see if they can keep that up this coming week. So we move into the second row. Number 24 this week. Same spot as last week as well. I know, it's not very creative, is it? But we are up to that point in the season where we're about 30 games in, and so 3 or 4 games in a given week doesn't necessarily move a team up or a team down. Minnesota's got a very good record under their new coach, John Hines. They get the victory today over the Vancouver Canucks in a shootout, and so they're back to NHL 500. And we will see, again, if they can get above 500 and start to really rack up the wins and threaten, to battle it out, maybe with Nashville, right? That'd be a lot of fun. But yeah, right now Minnesota stays in 24th. Number 23, moving up 3 spots from last week. Kind of a surprise to me how well they're playing and how long they're staying in the hunt. It's Montreal. The Montreal Canadiens, so they move up 3 spots. It was an impressive win tonight over the Islanders. True, the Islanders fight back in the third period, but they get the win. And they, are a team that's at NHL 500. So 500, 500. Who else is 500 that's on the board so far? Nobody. Nobody else is 500. But these 2 teams are, so there you are. So all the sub-500s down here. But yeah, Montreal, I'm impressed that they're staying in the hunt. I'm not quite sure how. Like, I look at their roster, and I don't mean this as an insult, but I don't see a playoff roster there. But they're getting enough wins and enough points to stay in the hunt. So it's been impressive. Number 22, moving up 1 spot from last week. Just the one. Penguins. The Pittsburgh Penguins, they move up 1 spot. If they'd beaten Toronto tonight, they would have moved up more. They didn't beat Toronto tonight. No, they didn't. But again, 500 team, yes. So 3 500 teams back to back to back. I didn't even plan it this way. I just moved teams up and down, and I'm looking at it like, yep, all right, so that works. But yeah, Pittsburgh, it's been very much a feast or famine with this team. At least their power play seems to be getting it together. So that's good news for Pittsburgh, but yeah, they've got to start stringing some wins together or they're going to stay in this row and probably end up missing the playoffs. Number 21, dropping 5 spots from last week. And I'm going to explain this. So, Arizona's got back-to-back shutouts, but they beat Buffalo and they beat San Jose. So, outside of that, not a great week for Arizona, not a great 5 games. They're very up and down. Now, they've won back-to-back games via shutout. And looking at this board, that's the one that I've kind of got an asterisk next to. Not literally, but I'm in my mind, I'm going, okay, they've got the back-to-back shutouts. I'll start moving them back up the board if we start seeing more wins for them against other teams that are ahead of them on the board. No problem at all. But for Arizona, they're down to 21st this week. Maybe shouldn't have been 16th last week, but once the power rankings are done, they are done. So yeah, Arizona's still ahead of a lot of teams, and they're in the mix for a playoff spot. Number 20, same spot as last week. St. Louis. The St. Louis Blues stay in the exact same spot as last week, so they fire their coach. They get back-to-back wins under a new coach, which will make fans happy and frustrated at the same time because they didn't want Berube to be fired. But you get that coach's bounce. You always get that. So St. Louis stays in 20th this week. They had actually dropped in that game that they lost that saw Berube out. But then they get back up to 20th with the back-to-back wins, and we'll see how things go for them from here. Number 19, dropping one spot from last week. So not a huge drop. Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay drops one spot. They get the win in Edmonton. They lost in Calgary. They lost in Vancouver. The West Coast road trip's been hard on a lot of teams. So I'm to the point where I'm like, you know what? When teams are losing in Western Canada and struggling on the road, I think I'm just going to chalk that up to Western Canadian teams play well against Eastern teams this year at home for some reason that we'll figure out at some point. That could be a good video to talk about things. But yeah, Tampa Bay's still staying in the mix. There's still every chance they end up in the playoff spot. As I've said in videos recently, and I talked about this in the standings video I did earlier this week, there's going to be good teams that miss the playoffs in the East, which is great for us as fans because it means it's going to be a dogfight down the stretch to get into the playoffs in the East, and I'm here for it. And Tampa Bay is probably going to be involved in that dogfight. Number 18, dropping 3 spots from last week. Tough go for them this week. Detroit Red Wings. So the Red Wings drop out of the top 2 rows for the first time since, I want to say, like week 1 or week 2. Detroit, it's kind of fallen off for them. So we'll see whether or not Detroit can really and truly get it back together. But that loss tonight against Philly and some of the other losses recently, it's tough. And I'm going to say this too. Patrick Kane's stats so far are not awful, but he's not... It hasn't had the effect that people would expect. And I know people are going to say, well, you know, he'll get his legs under him. He had hip surgery. And it makes me nervous because The Athletic did an article where they said if he plays every game till the end of the season, he'll have played the most games that any player has played in history after the surgery he had. It's tough. It's really, really hard. So for Detroit, the move of picking up Kane, I think they've won 1 of the 5 games with Kane in the lineup so far. And obviously, Lyon getting hurt tonight is not optimal. This is why you carry 3 goalies, though, right? So, yeah, for Detroit, they drop out of the top 2 rows this week. Apologies to Red Wings fans. Number 17, same spot as last week. Same spot. Edmonton. I had the Oilers up as high as 14th this week. They were up at 14th, and I was like, all right, the Oilers are back. And then they lost back-to-back games, and they're back below NHL 500. So the Oilers are 17th this week, and I'm not sure if Florida was that good tonight or if Edmonton just didn't have it or if it's a little bit of both. Probably a little bit of both. But for the Oilers, that was a game they needed. They didn't get it. And so they went 8 in a row, and then they lose 2 in a row, and they're 17th on the board this week. So there's your bottom half of the board. Drink it in, meaning the other 16 teams are the top 16. That's kind of how math works. All right, number 16, moving up 6 spots from last week. The New York Islanders. Here's the weird thing. The New York Islanders' record this week, not fantastic, but I thought they played better. That game against Toronto, I thought they played really, really well. And then, you know, tonight against Montreal, tough go of it, but I was like, you know what? Montreal's been a plucky team, so I moved Montreal up a little bit, and I didn't penalize the Islanders for that. So the Islanders, number 16 on the board. They've only won 14 out of their 30 games, but again, I feel like they've played better. And if they'd played 2 periods of the game the way they played the 3rd period tonight against Montreal, they probably win that. But at any rate, the Islanders in the top 2 rows. Number 15, also moving up 6 spots from last week. Nashville. So the Preds move up here. They're 18-13 on the season. And there were growing concern in the West. I don't know how far they can go with this. It does feel kind of like streaky, like this is a hot streak. And if it starts going in the other direction, who knows? But right now they look good. Saros' numbers have gotten a lot better. Their defense has gotten a lot better. And yeah, overall they're getting the production. And Forsberg, if they keep this up, Forsberg's going to get in the conversation. I don't think he's going to win the Hart, but he's got to get into the conversation. He's playing ridiculously well right now. And in the conversation, meaning when you talk about like these 10 players could win the Hart, I think Forsberg's going to end up in that area, because if you look at the stats, he's been amazing. And the overtime goals and just the way he's been playing, I think it's the mustache. I do. I think the mustache makes him stronger. Number 14, down 2 spots from last week. And I really get the feeling the bottom could fall out with Washington. Washington's one of those teams that I've been asking myself, so how are they doing this? Like how has Washington managed to stay afloat? And it's a matter of they get scoring by committee, they get some really good goaltending at times, and they manage to come up with some victories here and there. But it does feel like the wheels are slightly falling off. They lose that game against Nashville today, which means Nashville fans are going to say we should be ahead of Washington. Nope. Washington dropped a couple of spots. Nashville went up 6. If trends continue this way, they'll be ahead of Washington next week. I don't concern myself with who beat who this week because it just turns into a mess. Because then it's, well, 2 weeks ago these teams played and that team won, so why isn't that team ahead of this team? So I don't play that game. But yeah, Washington, it does feel like the wheels could be falling off at some point soon, especially if Charlie Lindgren's numbers start to fall off, right? Lindgren's been amazing. So if his numbers start to come back down into, say, a .905 kind of save percentage, that could be a problem for Washington. That being said, moving on to number 13, same spot as last week, and they've been impressive. Very impressive, and Philadelphia is still in the top half of the board. I remember early in the season, I did that video on Philly, and I was like, are they going to be good this year? And immediately they fell apart. And so I felt bad. I did, but they've come back since then. The Philadelphia Flyers, to me, look like a playoff team. I like their defense. I think that people were definitely overrating what Provorov brought on the blue line and what losing Provorov and DeAngelo would do. But defensively, they're better this year. And I think it's just the reality of it. Plus, their goaltending's better because the defense in front of them has been better. So it's been a win-win for Philadelphia so far. And we could see them adding at the deadline. For Danny Briere, this honestly has been a perfect season for him. I think if he decided at the deadline to say, well, we're 1 point out of the playoffs, so I don't know if we're going to go for it, so we might sell off some UFAs. I don't think their fans would be mad. I really don't. I think if they said at the deadline, you know what, we're 1 point out, we're going to go for it, I don't think their fans would be mad either. I don't think there's a wrong answer here for Danny Briere. And for the Flyers right now, yeah, they look like a playoff team. Number 12, moving up 2 spots from last week, New Jersey. The Devils have been quite good, and while I've heard some other comments about the Devils, and I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, and I think they will. I think they're playing quite well. I think Jack Hughes is rounding into form. He had a hat trick tonight. Schmid's given them good numbers. I understand that people are still talking about them needing a goalie. I'm not saying they don't. They absolutely will likely be adding a goaltender. John Gibson would seem to be the most obvious name that's out there, but I don't think there's any hurry. They're 16-11-1. They're playing well. Things have kind of turned around, and we'll see how long it takes for people to really recognize, oh, hey, look at that, New Jersey's playing well. But I've been impressed with New Jersey so far. Number 11, same spot as last week. It's a tough ranking. It's a tough ranking for the Canes, and I'll say why. Kochetkov been very good. Obviously, today they waive Antti Raanta, and Ranta's play has not been good. So Raanta has cost them games. I'm going to straight out say it. Raanta needs to make a save that was a meme on this channel, 5-6 years ago. Right now, it's kind of where we're at. And Raanta has not been making the saves they've needed. So as a team, I still believe they're number 11. I understand their record hasn't necessarily been number 11, but their goaltending has dragged them down. Now, they're going to have to take dramatic steps, and it feels like waiving Raanta is the first of what's going to be pretty dramatic steps for Carolina, and I'll have to report on that tomorrow. We'll talk about who comes in for Carolina once Ranta's waived and sent down, and what that's going to do to their goaltending. And I remember reading from Elliot Friedman the name of the goaltender that it's believed that they're bringing up. The name escapes me right now. I apologize. I'm old. So, yeah, number 11, Carolina. Number 10, same spot as last week, but I'm concerned. I have a lot of concern when it comes to the Dallas Stars. Dallas without Ottinger, it's going to be tough to get wins. And I'm not saying that as a slight to Wedgwood. It's just the team plays well in front of Otter, and Ottinger's been playing up and down, but he's been playing a little bit better lately. So the injury came at a bad time. They did come back and win that game. They lose tonight against St. Louis. St. Louis really needed that game. They're getting the coaching bump, so I didn't move Dallas down. But Dallas is in a position right now where this upcoming week is a big one as we get into the Christmas break. So next week, I'll be doing the power rankings and then no hockey for 3 days. So that'll be fun. But yeah, Dallas really needs over the next week to overcome the fact that, that Wedgwood's the goalie And at this point, the emergency backup goaltender was their backup tonight. Is that going to happen again? I hope not. It's one thing with the salary cap that just kind of drives me crazy. I think the emergency call-ups should just be, yeah, you should be allowed to have a player on your roster because this guy's hurt. Makes sense. But at this point, yeah, we'll see how long it takes before Dallas calls up a guy. But it doesn't matter because Wedgwood's going to be the goalie. I don't think there's anybody. Obviously, there's Matt Murray in Texas. They could call him up. That would throw people off to be like, wait, Matt Murray, I thought he was out. But yeah, they have the other Matt Murray. We'll see if he comes up and if he gets any games. Number 9, dropping 3 spots from last week. And it would have been more. However, with the win tonight, Florida prevents themselves from dropping a little bit further. Plus, at this point, I couldn't justify having Florida below Dallas or Carolina. So that's where I'm at with that. Florida drops out of the top row. But the win tonight against Edmonton was impressive after back-to-back shutouts against them by Vancouver and by Seattle. The Seattle one stung. The Vancouver one, Vancouver's pretty good at protecting a shutout in the third period this year. I never thought I'd see the day I said that on this channel. But yeah, that win against Edmonton tonight, that was impressive for Florida and prevented me from having to make a decision about, so does Dallas move up or does Carolina move up? Because I don't feel like Florida should be beneath them. I don't want to have like overly wild, crazy moves. Because again, and this is where I'll come back to Edmonton on this for a second. So Edmonton gets bumped way up, right? And there's other power rankings where they got bumped way up when they started winning. This is why it's a gradual climb. Because they won 8 in a row, they got up to 17th. They lose 2 in a row, they stay 17th, right? So to me, they're 1 game below 500. I think 17th is the good idea. That's why it's a gradual climb. It's not just really, really ridiculous climbs and drops. The way I used to do the power rankings, it was just straight up who won and who lost. And my power rankings from one week to the next were chaos. Every week it was a different team at number 1. Every week everybody moved 5 or 6 spots. The power rankings meant nothing. So I feel like the power rankings now are better. That's why when people are like, oh, you should do it different. No, because when I've done it different, I have not been happy with the results. I tried that early this season. Nope. So we get into the top row. And these are the teams that right now are, I think, playing the best hockey. Number 8, dropping 1 spot from last week. And it's interesting because every week people say I underrate Boston. The problem is, like, Boston, they get the win over the Islanders last night. Not their best game. They lose against the Rangers tonight. They took way too many penalties. They were undisciplined. And they've just been kind of one up and one down and kind of meandering after that great start to the season. And that's where those great starts are really important. But it definitely makes their record look better than I think how they're playing right now. So to me, the Bruins at 8th is about right. And if Pastrnak gets suspended, I don't know where the goals are going to come from while he's out. But Boston's overcome injuries and absences before, and their record's been good, even though Bergeron and Krejci both retired in the offseason. So goaltending really helps, right? Swayman's been excellent. Olmark's been very good as well. Keeps them in the top row. Without the goaltending, I think Boston would be down in this region. If Boston had just average goaltending, I really don't think Boston would be in that anywhere near that top row. They'd still be winning games, but they wouldn't be in the top row. Number 7, and threatening to drop out of the top row. They are threatening to drop out of the top row. Colorado. They dropped 2 spots from last week. Colorado, there's been some struggles. Now, of course, without Makar, that's going to hurt too. They didn't have Makar in the lineup tonight. But still, it's a 6-2 loss in Winnipeg. And they haven't quite looked like the Avs lately. And again, you have an 82-game schedule. You're going to have teams go through this period where they're not necessarily bringing their A game. I do expect Colorado to be a top team at the end of the season. I expect them to be a very tough out in the playoffs. And if you told me, hey, you know, this coming June, Colorado's going to win the Stanley Cup, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me. I think almost any team in this top row you can make the argument for. But yeah, Colorado ends up 7th this week. Number 6, moving up 3 spots from last week. It was quite the win tonight, wasn't it? So the Toronto Maple Leafs moved back up into the top row for the first time in a while. Just looking at it's been a while since Toronto was in the top row, but they belong here. They're 16-6-6, so that's a lot of 6s. And yeah, they've started getting regulation wins. So everybody was just dunking on them for, they don't win in regulation. It's not going to matter. They don't win in regulation. Now they've started winning in regulation. The funny part is we don't say that in playoffs. We don't say, well, that team won all 4 games in that round, but all 4 of them, they were in overtime. So, the next round they're going to get killed because they can't win in regulation. We don't make that argument in the postseason, but we'll make it in the regular season. It's odd. I understand that's what decides who finishes where, is if a team's tied and has the same number of wins, that regulation is how they decide. But if you win a whole bunch of games and get a bunch of points, who cares? And for Toronto right now, they're in the who cares category. They've only lost 6 in regulation so far out of 28. So that's pretty good. Next up, number 5 on the board. And moving up 3 spots from last week, Vancouver. Yeah, I'll use this puck this week. The Vancouver Canucks, that's the Genoagic themed, the Aboriginal themed magnet, or puck. Sorry, I have magnets of this as well, of course. But yeah, the Canucks had a really good week. They've won 4 in a row coming into the game against Minnesota. They lose that game in a shootout. I don't penalize them for losing in a shootout in Minnesota. Minnesota's been playing relatively well lately. So for Vancouver, this is an interesting season. As I said, they'd won 4 in a row coming into that game, and they looked good. So for Vancouver, they're back in the top row. I did not see that coming. I didn't think in December of this year I'd have Vancouver in the top row. If you told me that, I would have said, why? Or I would have just said, is it based on right now, or am I doing a retrospective on the 2010s or the 2000s, or how did they end up in the top row? And I just say that because this is a team that's defied gravity for a long time this year, and yeah, they look legit. Check that interview I did with with Ted Ramey there. I said I think the Canucks are legit. I believe in them. I'm not even worried about jinxing them at this point. So that's where we're at. Number 4, dropping 1 spot from last week, just 1. So for the Jets, they're number 4 this week. They were number 3 last week. They did not have a bad week. Here's the thing: they beat the Kings after losing against San Jose, and then they come home and they beat Colorado. That's an impressive week. For me, what happened was there was a team that passed them who was having a better month. And so, yeah, Winnipeg ends up 4th this week. But, yeah, they're legit. They're a contender. And if Winnipeg keeps playing the way they've been playing, they're going to be really tough in the playoffs. I'm kind of excited about how well some of these Canadian teams could play in the playoffs. I'm going to get disappointed again, obviously, because Canadian teams don't win in the playoffs. But, yeah, Winnipeg looks really good right now. That 6-2 win against Colorado, nobody can say that was a fluke. The win against LA, nobody can say that was a fluke. And then there's that loss against San Jose that just, I'm kind of treating that like, well, that was just their down game. I don't know. Number 3, also dropping 1 spot from last week, the New York Rangers. So the Rangers no longer in first place on the board, but they're still top 3 and they're still playing well. They get the victory tonight in overtime against the Boston Bruins. That's what'll happen when Boston gives them all those power plays. Same as the game before. They were drawing a bunch of power plays against Anaheim, and the Rangers are very good on the power play. So, yeah, the Rangers, I'm impressed with what they've been doing. They are still top 3 on the board. It's just a matter of the team that's number 2 is one that, just looking at the stats over the last month, the Las Vegas Golden Knights have been very good. Vegas has been really strong, really quite good, and would be number 1 if not for that loss against Buffalo and the fact they didn't look great in that 3rd period against Buffalo. So I was like, 2nd is the right spot for them this week, and so we'll see. And it's funny because on the camera, it's just that looks like it's made all the rest of them look just lousy. But anyways, I love that puck. If I could find that puck with all 32 teams, absolutely, that'd be what I'd be doing every week. It looks great on camera. But Vegas is number 2 this week, which means number 1. And it surprises me too. So if you're saying, well, that's kind of a surprise, I'm right there with you. The Kings are there back-to-back weeks. So we had the Rangers number 1 3 weeks in a row. Now the Kings are number 1 in back-to-back weeks. Yes, the Rangers beat the Kings earlier in the week. Rangers had also a setback during the week, and things happened. But again, if not for the loss last night, Vegas would be number 1. That setback last night, combined with LA, ends up getting those 2 points tonight when they need them. Yeah, they get the win. Plus, I thought Decord really did his best to try to steal that one for Seattle tonight. I thought LA outplayed them for most of that game. So LA is playing quite well, and on the road we know they're really, really strong. But yeah, I think these top 8 teams, any of these 8 teams, you can make an argument for them being able to go on a run in the playoffs right now. Right now. April, we could have a whole other discussion. But for right now, yeah, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for watching. And, of course, in the comment section below, tell me who I hate. Because every week there's somebody that I'm hating on. And I guess it might be Arizona. But, again, the shutouts over San Jose and Buffalo, we'll see what happens when they're against somebody else. And if that back-to-back shutouts, if that helps their confidence, and if they're able to beat those teams that are above them on the board. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.